At Sierra, discover great deals on top brand workout gear, like high-quality walking shoes, which might lead to another discovery.
40,000 steps, baby. Who's on top now, Karen?
You've taken the office step challenge a step too far. Don't worry, though. Sierra also has yoga gear. It might be a good place to find your zen. Discover top brands at unexpectedly low prices. Sierra, let's get moving.
This episode is brought to you by State Farm. Listening to this podcast? Smart move. Being financially savvy? Smart move. Another smart move? Having State Farm help you create a competitive price when you choose to bundle home and auto. Bundling, just another way to save with the personal price plan. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. Prices are based on rating plans that vary by state. Coverage options are selected by the customer. Availability, amount of discounts and savings, and eligibility vary by state.
When I talked to Garrett DeVink, I asked him to introduce me to a man he'd written about. A man named Daryl Lowe.
Daryl Lowe is the chief of police at the Redmond Police Department. Redmond is a suburb just outside of Seattle. It's actually where Microsoft is based. And Daryl has been a police officer for almost 30 years. He worked in Santa Monica for a long time. He's kind of seen it all in terms of his career as a police officer.
Garrett is a reporter for The Washington Post, but he doesn't usually cover law enforcement. The reason he wrote about Daryl Lowe is because Lowe's police department is working with an AI company called Long Eye.
They're an AI company here in San Francisco that is trying to sell AI tools, chatbot kind of thing, ChatGPT for police. And Daryl Lowe is actually one of the first chief of polices to actually get access to the technology and deploy it with his officers.
Yeah, how does it work? Did Daryl talk you through what they do?
Daryl's explained to me that, being a detective is a little different than what we might see in the movies. A lot of it is essentially just sitting at your desk, slowly going through binders and binders of evidence, transcripts of interviews, photos that have been gotten through warrants from people's phones, from their social media profiles, looking for links, trying to draw those connections. I mean, you can imagine the meme of, someone standing in front of a board with a bunch of photos and, red string, red yarn, connecting it all. And you can imagine that going through all that evidence does take time and looking for those links. And what Long Eye does is essentially, you upload either, a giant transcript or you dump a bunch of photos into there or any kind of other digital evidence. And it uses a large language model, the same technology behind tools like ChatGPT, to parse all of it and essentially gives you, a super search engine where you can say, hey, Long Eye, I've just given you 60 hours of recordings. Can you tell me if there are any names that come up more than once?
Cops have access to a lot of information, but they don't always have the resources to go through all of it. Enter AI.
It can crunch through the data and highlight the parts of the recordings that are what you're looking for. And essentially it allows police officers to go through evidence much more quickly, kind of ask questions of the evidence rather than having to go through it line by line on their own and draw the connections themselves.
How common are these kind of AI partnerships becoming for law enforcement and different police departments around the country?
I think the big picture here is that technology has given police access to way more evidence than they ever really had to deal with. You can imagine maybe if you think back to the 40s, 50s, 60s, police were interviewing people. They were maybe doing some wiretaps. They were going to scenes collecting evidence. Now, when a police officer or a detective begins to look into a case, they can go to Google and say, hey, I've got a suspect. Can you give me that person's Gmails over a period of time? They can go to Verizon or AT&T and say, hey, a crime occurred within, a certain radius of one of your cell phone towers. Can you give me the phone numbers of everyone who was near that tower at a certain time? That's where companies like Long Eye are stepping in. That's the problem that they're trying to solve. They're saying, hey, you're drowning in data. Let me give you AI tools to expedite that process of finding those needles in the haystack. This is something that's starting out, but it's definitely going to become more and more common as we go forward.
Today on the show, Silicon Valley wants AI working for your police department. Do you? I'm Lizzie O'Leary, and you're listening to What Next TBD, a show about technology, power, and how the future will be determined. Stick around.
When it comes to what your family eats and drinks, you know your choices matter. You're the expert because you know what fits your life. And getting it right starts with good information. That's why America's beverage companies are sharing more information about our ingredients at goodtoknowfacts.org. No spin, no judgments, just the facts straight from the experts for more than 140 beverage ingredients. Visit goodtoknowfacts.org.
This episode is brought to you by Saks Fifth Avenue. Saks Fifth Avenue makes it easy to get creative with your personal style and find the best arrivals for fall. Whether you're trying out the latest fashion trends or curating a closet that stands the test of time, Saks has you covered. Saks makes shopping feel personal. Their trusted in-store stylists are there to guide and inspire you, helping you find pieces that fit every aspect of your lifestyle. Prefer online shopping? Saks.com offers a curated selection tailored to your taste. From new arrivals by your favorite designers like Prada jackets and Gucci loafers to stylish pieces for your everyday needs. Whether it's date night, a vacation, a special occasion, or just lounging in style, Saks helps you find the perfect look for every occasion. If you want shopping to be fun and easy, then head to Saks Fifth Avenue for inspiring ways to elevate your personal style every day. It's worth saying how important data has become to policing over the last 20 years. Law enforcement often has access to audio and video from crime scenes and to people's digital footprints, where they go, what they buy, what they like on social media.
I mean, they have all of the above. A lot of the time when they get information from the big tech companies, I mean, that is done through warrants. So there's obviously laws and procedures. But a lot of civil rights, advocates say that, there's too much data going back to police, that it's too easy for them to get access to people's individual digital footprints. And, often people who are not even necessarily involved with the crime or connected to it in any way because they happen to be close to that cell tower, all the data was requested. They're now being sucked into police databases, and we don't know how long that information stays there. There's sort of a patchwork of different state laws when it comes to privacy. We don't have a federal standard. But I mean, essentially anything you can imagine, police do theoretically have access to. There's also, large data broker companies in the United States that will sell data to police without a warrant. So these are companies that kind of started out tracking people's digital footprints online in order to advertise to them and target advertisements towards them. But they also pick up that data and they can kind of sell it to the highest bidder. And police and federal agencies and also agencies from other governments have been known to buy this data and use it as part of the evidence that they have access to. And that kind of thing is not protected by a warrant. Other things that might happen is, if you're arrested, police might ask to look at your phone. And if you give them access to your phone, they could just pull everything off of it. I think people just need to remember that anything you do on your phone, anything you do on the internet, either through a warrant or through some other method, if a law enforcement or a national security agency really wants it, there is a way for them to get it.
I was really struck in your reporting by just how much that had increased over the last decade. I think one of the numbers that you put out was in the first half of 2014, Google got about 12,500 requests for data from police and national security agencies. And then for the first half of 2024, that number went up nearly fivefold to 61,000. That's just an astonishing amount.
Yeah, I mean, you can imagine that it's a huge potential data trove. And if you're an investigator, you want your hands on everything that you can get to try to make your life easier, to prove your case. If you're a prosecutor, you want all that evidence to be able to line up your arguments so that when you go into court, you win your case. And I think as police have sort of a lot of the way this starts is it might start initially with, larger, more tech-savvy police departments. You can imagine NYPD or LAPD, organizations that have thousands of employees, have their own tech experts. They're the ones who sort of first realize, there's a new technology out there. we can use that. We can send warrants to those companies to get that new piece of evidence. And then as time goes on, smaller police departments realize that they can do it as well. And so something that was maybe focused on major FBI investigations of, transnational crime rings, trying to get emails to prove these major cases, now goes to the point where, a small county sheriff's department might be asking Google for information to, look into property crime. And so that's the way things go. I mean, if something is legal, police are going to want to use it to do their job. Police are going to do whatever they can to do their job, just like any of us would. And, that's kind of the way things have gone over the last few years.
Well, that brings us to the data question and kind of where we started this conversation with Long Eye. It is so much about sorting. How much do we know about kind of how widespread AI use is for this kind of sorting and pattern recognition and, I don't know, for lack of a better term, like data examination by law enforcement?
I think it's relatively new. I think there are AI tools we can think of, image recognition, facial recognition. I mean, these are things that have been out there for a while, obviously very controversially, especially when it comes to facial recognition, which has been shown in multiple instances to lead to sort of false identifications, people being arrested. Also, there's concerns that sometimes facial recognition algorithms perform better on white faces than they do on faces of Black people or other people of color. So there's been a history of new technology being introduced and then flaws being pointed out and real people being harmed by it. And so I think that, the other aspect I would say people should kind of be aware of is we have license plate readers, which also use image recognition technology. It's AI, but it's been around for a while. It's the same technology. If you can type into your Google Photos, like, hey, show me all the photos of my dogs, that's AI. It's maybe not the ChatGPT AI, but it's an earlier form of AI. And we have cameras all over our country right now in thousands of communities that are scanning the license plates of every single car that goes by them on a daily basis. And they build these giant databases that if police are looking for an individual car, they can say, okay, it was at this point, exactly at this time. And one of the concerns from civil rights advocates that I've spoken to is they say, well, the easier it is to use all this data, it creates a bigger incentive for the collection of data. And maybe before police were drowning in data, they said, okay, well, we don't even want to get more of it because we don't even know what to do with the data we have. But if AI companies step in and say, hey, we'll solve that problem for you, we'll make it really easy, they'll say, great, let's go get even more data. And then we have to reconcile in our society with the fact that there's going to be even more surveillance and more data collection.
Well, what happens then with the hallucination problem? Because large language models hallucinate. They make things up. They come up with examples that aren't real. Is that something that police departments are wrestling with at all?
Absolutely. I mean, I think police departments are very aware of this. And, just to sort of unpack that a little bit, the way Long Eye works is that it actually works more as a sort of a search tool. So it does use that large language model to understand the text or the images or the video or whatever it's looking through. But then it will, actually show the police officer using it specifically in the underlying evidence where it is drawing its conclusion from. So if you say, I'm looking for all the names of men that show up in this, 60 hours of transcripts, it won't just give you a list of the names. It will also pull you to the exact part of the transcript that it is drawing that information from. And so that's something where, at the end of the day, police, I'm sure this has happened. We have examples of, lawyers going to court with completely hallucinated information. But, the police officers that I spoke to, they take this very seriously. They obviously don't want to, go to court with things that are wrong and, accuse someone falsely or end up being censured or embarrassed themselves. And so they say they will always look at the underlying evidence and that the AI tool is really only a way to help them figure out exactly where to look. Of course, though, as we've seen with other examples of AI, there is a huge chance that things could go wrong. People are busy. People, maybe are on deadlines. They want to move quickly. And at the end of the day, it still requires, human oversight to be used correctly.
One of the threads in your reporting that was the most interesting to me is how I think attitudes in Silicon Valley have shifted toward law enforcement. I would argue that 15, maybe even 10 years ago, there was much more reticence on the part of big tech to get involved. There was much more of a show me a warrant and then we'll talk attitude. Do you think that has shifted, and why?
I definitely think that has shifted. I think it's true. Silicon Valley's culture traditionally has been very sort of libertarian, we're independent, we do our own thing, we're creating the future, we don't need to work with the government. And from a commercial perspective, the government has traditionally been seen as a pretty bad customer for Silicon Valley because it's bureaucratic. There's kind of only one entity that you're selling to versus, for Silicon Valley companies, they want to move really quickly. They want to grow really fast. They want to move fast and break things. They want to ship products that maybe aren't 100% finished. And so, at the end of the day, Silicon Valley is kind of driven by those commercial incentives. They want to sell a lot of stuff. They want to make a lot of money. They want to grow really fast.
The best example of this is Palantir. The company's stock price is up roughly 340% since last year. That type of growth has executives at other companies in Silicon Valley saying, hey, I want that too.
This is a company that very purposefully built essentially business software for governments, for national security agencies to help them link together the different databases that they were working with, the different pieces of evidence that they were bringing together to help them see the big picture. And Palantir has done very, very well. It is a hugely, profitable company. A lot of the people who worked at Palantir over the years have gone on to start other successful startups and to work at other Silicon Valley companies and kind of spread the way that they work and the way that they think. And I think commercially, other people here in the Valley have said, oh, so there is a way to make money selling to governments. And that has kind of inspired other people to say, let me try to find a way to make software for, police departments or for the military. And with the political success of Donald Trump and the MAGA movement, I think conservatives in Silicon Valley have felt a lot more license to sort of say, this is who we are, this is what we think. Our political ideas are right-wing, and we think that tech is something that should be used by the military, something that should be used by police, that should be used for law enforcement and public safety. Once you're selling something to the Marines, selling it to a local police department doesn't feel as much of a stretch. So I think that's kind of what's been happening.
After the break, how legal is all of this? Looking to make a huge difference for your business? Check out Quo, formerly OpenPhone. It's the same business phone system you've heard before, just with a new name. Quo is the #1 business phone system that streamlines and scales your customer communications. And if you're running a business, you know every customer conversation matters. Whether you're a one-person operation or have a large team that needs better collaboration tools, Quo works through an app on a phone or computer. You and your team can share one number and collaborate on customer calls and texts like a shared inbox. That way, any teammate can pick right up where the last person left off, keeping response times fast. See why over 90,000 businesses trust Quo to manage their business's calls and texts. Get started free, plus get 20% off your first 6 months at quo.com/TBD. That's QUO.com/TBD. And if you have existing numbers with another service, Quo will port them over at no extra charge. Quo. No missed calls, no missed customers. Shape the future of enterprise AI with Agency, AGNTCY. Now an open-source Linux Foundation project, Agency is leading the way in establishing trusted identity and access management for the Internet of Agents. The Internet of Agents is the collaboration layer that ensures AI agents can securely discover, connect, and work across any framework. With Agency, your organization gains open, standardized tools and seamless integration. including robust identity management to identify, authenticate, and interact across any platform. Join industry leaders like Cisco, Dell Technologies, Google Cloud, Oracle, Red Hat, and more than 75 supporting companies to set the standard for secure, scalable AI infrastructure. Empower your company to deploy multi-agent systems with confidence. Is your enterprise ready for the future of agentic AI? Visit agency.org to explore use cases now. That's agntcy.org.
I'm Scott Hansen, host of NFL Red Zone. Lowe's knows Sundays hit different when you earn them. We've got you covered with outdoor power equipment from Cobalt and everything you need to weatherproof your deck with Trex decking. Plus, with lawn care from Scott's and, of course, Pit Boss grills and accessories, you can get a home field advantage all season long. So get to Lowe's, get it done, and earn your Sunday. Lowe's, official partner of the NFL.
How does this all get figured out in court? I'm thinking of the example of, say, a geofence warrant where law enforcement says, okay, Google, turn over the data of all the people who are in X or Y place, adjacent to this crime, or, as we have seen in some cases, adjacent to this protest. How does the court system handle this?
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the other things that civil rights advocates, defense lawyers are pretty concerned about when it comes to the use of technology by law enforcement, because police will figure out a new way of getting evidence. The geofence warrants is an example that you provided. Cell tower dumps, which is when you get all the data from a specific cell tower. And there's also these, reverse keyword search warrants where they say to Google, give me the names of everyone who searched for a specific address on Google search over a period of time because a crime was committed at that address. These are highly controversial, and a lot of lawyers, legal scholars feel that they are actually unconstitutional. The Constitution protects Americans from unreasonable searches.
So this would be a Fourth Amendment issue.
Exactly. And so police, they see the technology, they kind of start experimenting with it, they start moving forward. The tech companies who have their own lawyers, they don't necessarily give everything willy-nilly, but broadly, I would say the tech companies do give police more or less what they ask for. They do try to narrow it down sometimes, and sometimes there's a bit of a back and forth. But Google, for example, their own data shows that in around 90% of police requests, they do provide at least some data to the police. All of this is happening before anything even goes to court, right? I mean, this is part of the investigatory process. And sometimes a case will go to trial, and it won't even be clear that these high-tech forms of getting evidence were even used, because maybe the police use a geofence warrant or a cell tower dump in order to, find a few suspects. And then they use other methods to confirm that information and bulk up their case with more evidence that might be more traditional. Maybe they interviewed someone and they admitted to the crime. And then when they go to court, they don't even necessarily say to the court, oh, by the way, the reason we arrested this person in the first place before they confessed was because they showed up in a geofence warrant. And so it's not always clear what evidence was used and that kind of thing. You actually need someone to fight back or to sue to say, hey, I don't think, this was fair. They need to know that that's how the police found them in the first place, which isn't always clear. Suspects are not always clear exactly how the police came to figure out that they were a person of interest in the case. And so a lot of this is happening, and there isn't really a potential for a judge to weigh in and say, hold on a second, this violates the Constitution. And so that often takes several years before those cases really wind their way up. Then, of course, there's appeals. Sometimes they have to go to the Supreme Court. And we have a situation where police may be using technology for a decade before the Supreme Court weighs in on whether it's constitutional or not.
Well, this leads me to how Americans feel about this, because on the one hand, Americans are often willing to trade privacy for convenience, but on the other, places are starting to push back on having some of these products out and functioning in public.
It's a complex issue, and I agree with you that, this sort of cynical view is clearly we don't actually care about privacy, even if we say we do, because We are all using social media, or, for the most part, we're all using the internet. We kind of vaguely know that our phones and web browsers are tracking us, but it just feels like there's nothing we can really do. We all need to use Gmail, even though we know that, they can access our information, because that's just the way the world is. And people are kind of worried about other things. And at the same time, I agree with you. I think people do consistently say they're uncomfortable with these things. And I do think that when you kind of take something, okay, maybe people are okay with their privacy being invaded for commercial reasons, to get better ads. Maybe they're like, it's not the end of the world if Nike knows that I like red shoes instead of green shoes. But then if you say, and you sort of extrapolate that and say, they also won't care if their police department knows exactly where they're going every day in their car, people say, whoa, those are different things.
Well, there's also the issue right now of these large-scale deportation efforts by the Trump administration. Do we know if local law enforcement that is using some of these automated tools, do they share data with federal agencies?
Yeah, there's been some reporting that here in California, some local law enforcement agencies who have access to license plate readers, those are the cameras that scan every time a car goes by and log that license plate, have been sharing that data with ICE and other federal authorities, even though in California there is actually some legislation that says local police departments are not supposed to just willy-nilly share the data that they collect with other federal entities or other police departments. And so there's kind of the law and the expectation, and then there's the reality, which is that, there are dozens of police departments in each state. Some have access to technology, some don't. Some have relationships with federal agencies, some don't. And it's a pretty complex picture. And so I do think that there is definitely data that is maybe being, someone set up a camera saying, this is only because we've had a lot of break-ins in this neighborhood, or we've had a lot of suspicious vehicles. We want to protect our community. And then suddenly that same information is being shared with the federal agency and used for a completely different purpose than what it was initially intended for.
When I read your reporting, I kept thinking about something that billionaire Larry Ellison from Oracle said last year, which is, we're going to have supervision. Every police officer is going to be supervised at all times. And if there's a problem, AI will report that problem and report it to the appropriate person. Citizens will be on their best behavior because we are constantly recording and reporting everything that's going on. Is that where this is all going? Am I being too dystopian?
Well, I think that, things are messy, right? If you sort of describe the situation we have now, where we all have phones that could potentially listen to us, that can record us, and, that walking around in our pockets, we have CCTV cameras everywhere. If you describe that situation to someone 50 or 60 years ago, they would say, you live in a dystopia. You have giant tech companies that are centralized, that control the data of, millions and millions of Americans and people all over the world. That sounds like science fiction. And yet we still feel, that not everyone sort of agrees that we're necessarily living in this terrible situation where we don't have any rights anymore. There does feel to be avenues for, protection and that kind of thing. And I do think that the tech companies have responded to people's concerns. It is possible to dig into your settings and stop the amount of data that is being collected on you. Maybe not 100%, but we are able to sort of have a bit more control over this than we were when these products were initially launched. So I feel like in this country, things are, messy and complicated, and there's lots of different people with different incentives and ideas and desire to kind of change things or not change things. And so I'm not sure if it will be that perfect and pat where we're all living in, this terrible
Minority
dystopia,
Report.
Minority Report. But, the thing is, there are definitely people in Silicon Valley who say, well, if we had perfect surveillance, then no one would ever commit a crime. And, if you're not a criminal, you shouldn't worry about that, right? Which is kind of the canonical thing that people say at the beginning of a dystopian sci-fi. And so it's definitely something people should be aware of, and they should be paying attention to, they should be thinking about. And if they don't like the direction things are going, they should be advocating to change that.
Garrett DeVink, thank you so much for this totally fascinating reporting and for talking about it.
Anytime.
Garrett DeVink is a reporter for The Washington Post. And that is it for our show today. What Next TBD is produced by Evan Campbell and Patrick Fort. Our show is edited by Paige Osborne. Mia Lobel is the executive producer here at Slate, and TBD is part of the larger What Next family. We'll be back with more episodes next week. I'm Lizzie O'Leary. Thanks so much for listening.
Doug. Here we have the Limu Emu in its natural habitat, helping people customize their car insurance and save hundreds with Liberty Mutual. Fascinating. It's accompanied by his natural ally, Doug.
Limu? Is that guy with the binoculars watching us?
Cut the camera. They see us.
Only pay for what you need at libertymutual.com.
Liberty, 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 liberty.
Savings vary. Underwritten by Liberty Mutual Insurance Company and affiliates. Excludes Massachusetts.
It's okay not to be perfect with finances. Experian is your big financial friend and here to help. Did you know you can get matched with credit cards on the app? Some cards are labeled no ding decline, which means if you're not approved, they won't hurt your credit scores. Download the Experian app for free today. Applying for no ding decline cards won't hurt your credit scores if you aren't initially approved. Initial approval will result in a hard inquiry, which may impact your credit scores.
Experian.